All right, so she is our go-to person for Jennie Conrad, so I'd like to introduce Mary Kay.
Thank you. Please do.
Is that right?
Perfect. Everybody can see a screen. I'm Mary Kay Emmrich, and I'm a librarian. I'm not an historian. What sets these two vocations apart is that librarians enjoy the search, while historians enjoy compiling the gathered data and the results. You may find that you have a little librarian in you, too. I need to establish that I'm not an historian. I'm a storyteller. I've told several stories tonight, and I'm sure I'll tell more. And I've listened to so many tall tales. I've read documents and other people's research. I've walked the land that Jennie walked. So tonight, I'm going to tell you a story. Unlike the books we read and the films we watch, this story isn't finished. With limited resources, we never truly know the whole story. So for me personally, I'm never going to finish this story. I have avenues I've not explored yet in the story of Jennie and her town. This presentation is for tonight only. It will change the next time I'm asked to speak of this woman in this town. I'm saying this as a promise and not an apology for this evening. I'm going to tell a story, so please make your notes, remember questions. Oh, somebody's late, has to stay after. I will try to answer them when I finish tonight's story. If I cannot answer your question, perhaps your inquiry will inspire me to learn more for the next time I tell this tale. So tonight I'm talking about the history of Conrad and the legendary Jennie Conrad. And what you see behind my title is one of the maps. It is the official, if you will, map of the town of Conrad. Where is Conrad? Going to answer some basic questions. What remains of Conrad is located on the north side of the railroad tracks on County Road 725 North, 2 miles south of Lake Village, Indiana, and about a quarter mile east of US 41. This is our new county map, and where the star is located is about where the town of Conrad is located. Who founded Conrad? That's always a good question. Jennie Minerva Milk Conrad received 4,440 acres of ground in Lake and McClellan townships in 1895, some of which was formerly Beaver Lake, from her father for $1. It was a clean land transfer. Now, her father was Lemuel Milk, and you heard about Lemuel Milk last month. He was a key player in the draining of Beaver Lake, in the success of the draining of Beaver Lake. Many tried. Milk was one of the men that succeeded in draining that body of water. Jennie was the only daughter of Lemuel Milk, one of the men involved in the land deals and dredging, and his wife was Jane Milk Platt, who was a woman of wealth by her own right. This is Lemuel, and Lemuel's not a bad-looking guy, kind of stocky, and his wife, Jane Milk Platt. You'll notice that Jane only lived to be 50 years old. That comes into play later. Jennie, their daughter, was born in, some records say 1855, some say 1854. Jennie liked to tell the Census Bureau it was 1856, and I think it was because she was lying about her age. And this is her brother, Sherwood. Jennie was born in Iroquois County, Illinois. She was their only daughter, Sherwood their only son. Pardon me. Lemuel Milk was a self-made man. He owned land in both Illinois and Indiana. He owned a large mercantile, like a general store, a couple of ice houses, and he made financial investments. His most well-known financial pursuit was the draining of Beaver Lake. Pardon me. The money he filtered into the draining of Beaver Lake was his wife's money that she came into from her family. That's important later on. Jane Ann Platt was Jennie's mother, but she only lived to be 50. She passed away in El Paso, Texas, when she followed her son Sherwood there. He was taking a treatment for tuberculosis, which killed him 2 years later. This is May Elizabeth Sherwood Milk, and she was Lemuel's second wife. He married her 5 years after losing his first wife, and you'll notice the name Sherwood. That's a family name. She was she's the daughter of a first cousin to Lemuel's first wife, and 26 years younger than Lemuel Milk.
Did she have money too?
She knew how to handle money, I'll tell you that. Sherwood passed away in 1883 in Colton, California from tuberculosis. I don't know where Sherwood was educated, but I do know that Jennie was educated at Dearborn Seminary, which was an Episcopal college prep school for affluent girls in Chicago. Lemuel Milk remarried this cousin in 1886. Jennie, prior to that, married this gentleman, George Edward Conrad. And George was about 18 years older than Jennie. They had a very good marriage. They lived in Chicago on Indiana Avenue. And George was a cashier at the Union Stockyard National Bank. So George was involved with handling livestock and the finances surrounding handling livestock. Together they had a son, Platt Conrad, and Platt Milk Conrad was born in 1880. They lived very comfortably with a maid and a house girl to help Jennie manage their home and raise their child. They socialized. George was very affluent. Platt had all the amenities of childhood. From this picture, this is the one photograph that I've seen of Jennie Conrad where she looks truly happy. She has a bit of a smile on her face. From this photograph alone, you will be able to pick Platt out in any photograph I would show you. He always had that round, endearing face. Now remember, Jennie's mother passed away when Platt was just a year old, and then Jennie's brother, so this made a really difficult time for her. Jennie was the only heir to her father's empire in Illinois and Indiana, farms, land, ice houses, and successful mercantile. Farms, again, in both states. And remember that I told you in 1885, Jennie received 4,440 acres of ground in Lake and McClellan townships, some of which was formerly Beaver Lake, from her father for the cost of $1. Lemuel had money, and Jennie's mother's wealth besides, but he was always a few steps away from financial ruin, from his own financial ineptitude. And I know that when she received this land for $1, she was incensed. She was angry. She received the land that she received because it was the only land he held in Beaver Lake area that was free and clear. Everything else was still tied up with all the legal issues that surrounded the land exchanges and the riparian rights of Beaver Lake. So after he gave her this land, and she's already irked at him for his financial mismanagement, Lemuel announced he's going to marry May Sherwood, Jennie's maternal cousin, the 26 years younger girl. Jennie wasn't happy. She wrote a letter to May's mother, Charlotte, in November of 1886, and I have to share it with you. My dearest Charlotte, Mr. M. has informed me that he intends to marry your daughter May, whom I knew as a little child when my dear mother and I made you that happy visit, and but little did we think that when she was the one at her age, she would take my mother's place. Mr. M. has kindly hoped Mr. Conrad and I would be present at the marriage, but even if I were disinterested, I could not prevail upon myself to witness the shocking sight of a young girl, ignorant wholly of the world, sacrificed to the lust of an old man of 66. And that, too, with the consent of her parents. There will be but one verdict as to the affair, that it was for a money consideration, and it is to be hoped that Mr. M. has been frank as to his financial affairs so that you will not be mistaken, nor yet your daughter as to the price she brings. He is generally considered very wealthy, but if Mr. M has been frank as to his financial affairs, he will be able to tell you that your daughter will have to help him struggle as my poor mother did under a load of debt and land, every acre of which is mortgaged, and besides this, an indebtedness of nearly $50,000 to keep him out of ruin to a stockyard firm, which has been supplying him money for years, together with the money owed in Auburn, Shabance, to his work people, and many other places. This makes a load under which it would take a man of means indeed to stand up, to say nothing of a man that has been land poor since my youth. It's a lot of sentiment here. Mr. M has lands at Beaver Lake acquired by my mother's untimely death, but at present they are unsaleable, owing to the defective title, and which have never been paid for since he's owned them. In fact, it's been many years since he has paid expenses, and he has always been behind, until each year finds him deeper and deeper in debt. We were in hopes a strict attention to his affairs would extricate him, but it seems he has been too busy making love the past few years instead of money. That his estate just gets worse constantly. Mr. M cannot accuse me of trying to ruin his credit by frankly explaining his situation to you, for now that you are to be in the family, it is right you should know family matters. Probably the outside world will deem your daughter fortunate in securing for herself so apparently good a price, for between girls her age and men of 66, there can be no question of affection. It is too unnatural. But the outside world always overrates states, and of course, if Mr. Sherwood and you will be aware of the true state of finances, that will be enough. I should have addressed this letter to Mr. Sherwood, but I learned he is not at home. You can be at liberty to show this to cousins Elmer and Minnie, in fact, any of my mother's relatives. My mother's life was so embittered by this constant struggle with debt and expenses that I feel sure she will not envy her successor any more than we. I send you my kindest felicitations, and with regards for Cousin Elmer, I am with much sympathy. Jennie M. Conrad. That letter has no periods in it. It's a letter written in anger. It's connected with commas. So it's always been very difficult for me to read out loud. Of course, this was so scandalous. A letter from a daughter who was denied no opportunity in her youth. Came across sounding very embittered. Jennie held the deed to much of the Beaver Lake lands, which I have yet to do the research. I feel that Lemuel deeded the land that was clearly deeded, that was legal to give away, to resell. The rest he held and sold as the deeds were cleared. It makes sense after her statement that her mother's money was tied up in the land purchases here in Newton County. Since she received the land for the cost of $1, I am of the mind that Lemuel deeded that land to her in good faith. He did not try to make a profit off of it. The caustic letter I just read you did not escape Lemuel's notice. Later in November, he wrote back to Jennie. My dear and only daughter, Jennie, I write this to inquire of you how much longer are you going to continue to make an ass out of yourself? I think that's the finest response I've ever read. Have you no shame or any decency in you? What would you think if you had a daughter that was soon to be married, no matter to whom, irrespective of age, and Mrs. Sherwood should write to you, your daughter was going to unite herself with a man for no other reason, only for prostitution? Would you not say she was heartless and had no regard for your feelings? Wouldn't you say she was foolish and crazy, as everyone does of you that makes your false slanderous representation, that you make your false slanderous representations to? Wouldn't you say she had better look after her own welfare, mind her own business, and I will take my own and daughter's affairs? I think you would. Oh, my dear Jennie, how could you be so cruel and heartless as to write such a good letter to so good and pure a woman as Mrs. Sherwood, as you did on Sunday? Jennie, how could you write so harsh, cruel, unladylike letters to one that has been so kind to others? one that loves her family as much as any mother living does her family. In the name of God, how could you become so reckless and defiant to all decency to write this good motherly woman that her much-loved daughter was soon to engage in a life of prostitution with your loving father, who in that letter you politely call Mr. M? How could you do so? I say, how could you do so when you knew it would wound the feelings that good, kind, loving mother and her daughter against you for your life? They have your letter and will keep it as a record of your low meanness, your unscrupulous, selfish, and devilish disposition to ruin others, to try to build yourself up. I was in hopes you had lived long enough and had seen enough of the world to know that you could not control it by your selfishness and low meanness to your father and others. No, my dear Jennie, you cannot do it that way. I've often told you so. I've often told you heaven and hell was wherever you made it. It sounds to me like your mind must be in hell most of the time. I wouldn't suppose you could sleep. I would think your cruel, harsh, selfish, slanderous actions toward me, your father, would prevent you from sleeping. My dear Jennie, it's hard for me, or for any loving father, to give up his once loved child, one that he's dangled on his knee so many thousand times and kissed her millions of times. The love we had for each other is all gone by your crazy lying, by your public and personal slanderous declarations you have made in the railway cars and in the streets of Chicago, Kankakee City, to Judge Roach, George Sherwood, A. Gregory Cooley, Judge Orr Hickox, Birch, and others too numerous to mention, done more by 10,000 times more to injure my character and my financial standing than all the people I ever know or heard of in this world. How long could any good, sound-minded, loving child do so to try to break down the good character and financial standing of your good, loving father, one who has done all that was right and honest for me to do, and is willing to do all I can for you when I am treated as a father should be treated by his only child? Your conscience ought not to let you sleep until you write letters of forgiveness to Mrs. Sherwood and to me. I'm thinking you will have to die with grief. You will have to, or die with grief, I'm sorry. I will represent what I've written to you that is not to go to my house. I will repeat what I have written to you, that you are not to go to my house for anything that is in it in my absence. I have left strict orders with Hannah not to let you have a single thing in my absence. When I am there, I want you to come and get what is there belonging to you. Oh, how I wish you were good as you were once loving and kind. You would take so much comfort with your good husband and son. You would be so happy with everyone, and everyone would be happy with you. You'd be in heaven all the time if you would take a good, true, loving course. Yours, love to all, Father. And then Lemuel Milk in parentheses. So from this point forward, Jennie was disassociated from Lemuel. He did marry May, who turned out to be quite the adept financial manager. May and her daughter Mary were the beneficiaries of Lemuel's entire estate when he passed away. Jennie received $1, an insult. She rarely mentioned the name of her father, and she had little trust in men after that. Around 1891, Jennie and George left the city and moved to her land in Indiana. No one knows what prompted the move. Jennie owned the land from her 1885 gift from her father, and they built Oak Dean Farm. I'm almost certain that this photograph is Oak Dean, as the exterior matches the interior of later photos of Jennie. This land, thanks to a fellow named Richard Katz, who worked with a 1939 aerial map. Richard is my Conrad colleague and co-speculator. We know now where Oak Dean was located. Thanks to Rich's hard work with this aerial map, we're sure that Oak Dean was located on the west side of 41, excuse me, just south of what we now call the Conrad Bridge or the Upside Down Bridge. There's a structure there and an old but solid concrete well. So Jennie and George and Platt moved to Indiana. We believe that Platt attended boarding school, but I cannot substantiate that yet. George commuted to the city via train from Lake Village, and this may or may not have stoked Jennie's dislike of the Lake Village community. Her father passed away in 1893, leaving the remaining Indiana land to his wife May and their daughter Mary, and leaving Jennie that dollar. His will was probated here in Newton County, and that had to infuriate Jennie, because I'm certain some of it had to appear in the local papers. Excuse me. In 1895, May sold the remaining Newton County land to a couple of fellows from Illinois for a total of $230,000. That had to make Jennie angry, as that land had been purchased with money that Lemuel had from his first wife's inheritance. So she's angry about her mother passing. She's angry about her brother passing. Her father stiffed her on her inheritance. Now he sold the land that he bought with her mother's, or actually his second wife sold the land that she bought, or that he bought with his first wife's money, and she made a killing on that land. Then in 1886, her husband George Conrad passed away very unexpectedly. He was 58. Jennie was then 41 with a 16-year-old son, and she truly had no one to go to help her. That truly saddens me, but it put her on a course for her own quest for success. The only examples of success she had are what her grandfather in New York, her mother's father, and her own father did. So, that's what Oak Dean looks like now. If you drive on County Road 700 North, you're going to see this structure, and I believe the well's still open, isn't it, Richard?
The well is...
Has it been closed down? The well is right about here.
Yeah. This is an old mattress. Do not walk on it.
No.
I think there's a picture of the well, too. And this, if you can see this support here, this angle iron here, there's one there. There's another one.
This is right over
there.
here. Yep.
And there's a pipe coming out of the ground here. They all run to the well, which is underneath that mattress. And the house, her house, I believe, of course, it's hard to see from this angle, but there's actually a large area right here.
Yes.
Where there's still some foundation.
Yeah, you can still see some of the foundation in the
It has
ground.
nothing to do with this.
That structure.
Yeah.
That came later.
Yeah.
So Jennie started out dividing her land in her property into farms, and she named those farms, and she hired tenant farmers to operate them. She began boarding horses and started looking into raising livestock. And if you can see the red line on this map, it's very faint, runs across this way. A lot of that was land holdings that Jennie owned. And you can see notes that say cultivated, pasture, grassland. Those were Jennie's land holdings. So looking to her family on both sides for inspiration, she started raising livestock. While she kept dairy cattle and Angus cattle for beef, she focused on hogs, specifically spotted pole and China hogs. She went hog wild, so to speak. Jennie was a swine woman. This is one of her brood sows. She would ship at her peak, she was shipping 1,000 head of hogs out of Conrad every year. And I use the word massive, but that's a huge amount of pork. That's a whole lot of pig. Jennie wrote for the Hoosier Farmer, "Now a woman left widowed does not have to be planted among her relatives or take in sewing and washing. She can buy a cow or two or a few purebred pigs and go back to her farm and let nature do the rest." In pioneer days, women were confined to the interior of their home. From dawn until dusk, she had to toil. Her work was never finished until the grave yawned, but now is quite different. The country has given women their place in the life of the nation, and no more is it considered out of the ordinary for women to engage in a livestock industry. The best asset for any woman on a farm is the hog. If she will stick to her job of breeding and selling the best she will do, she will not be worried about finances. Many women will strike a cat or cuddle a dog and shrink from a pig. Not every woman is mentally constructed to engage in the hog business or other livestock raising, but there are a few who schooled themselves to earn compensation far in excess to that considered in the many other lines where women have succeeded. I have no hesitation in advising women to engage in the livestock industry. If she does take it up, she should stay on the job, for the eye of the master is what prevents the loss in this day of undependability of labor. So go to it, girls. As a person with an English major, the change in voice in that just drives me crazy. But Jennie loved spotted Poland China hogs. So my next question, when was Conrad founded? Jennie planned her town of Conrad based on the Union Jack flag. And if you look at this layout, and this was actually Platt's copy, her son Platt's copy. Jennie laid this out. She filed it with the state of Indiana in 1908, but she had a U.S. Post Office commission from 1906 to 1915. So she had that post office commission 2 years ahead of time. And when you look at the map, there's a large park, and then the rest of the community, and there's a rail line. And that's the New York Central rail line. She had plans for that rail line. Jennie did not like Lake Village. I have read that she didn't like the Eastern European women, and I think George's travels to and from Chicago via train from the Lake Village Depot was a source of ire for her. If she had her own town, she could have her own depot and post office and business center. So Jennie made her own town specifically to allow her to conduct business. From her pamphlet, Spotted Poland China Hogs, the hog of the hour, Jennie wrote, "The advent of the New York Central Railroad, to which I presented 4 miles of 100 feet right-of-way, necessitated the building of a small town having the only stone station on the line." And this is Jennie's railroad depot. The gentleman standing in the door is Rufus Robinson. If you remember an attorney in this community named Edwin Robinson, Rufus is his father. This depot is also built out of Conrad brick. Jennie had her own brickyard. And Conrad brick was an unusually sized, rough-edged brick that she produced and built several structures with, but the state of Indiana shut down her brickworks because they thought the brick were unsafe. I'm kind of the mind that we have a couple buildings in Lake Village built with that brick that might make the state have to eat those words, but we won't go there. There was a church, a post office, a schoolhouse, which I do not have a picture of. I have never seen a picture of the schoolhouse, only of children playing in the schoolyard. Stockyards, and this is Jennie's stockyard. And model cottages for employees. Now, when I hear cottages, I think of uninsulated wooden structures, simple homes meant for seasonal dwelling. Perhaps this is why we don't have any pictures of the homes, and there are no remains for those homes. I think they were built not even slab on, I think they were built right on the ground. I do know they were all painted a nasty shade of yellow. And when comments were made about it, Jennie's remarks were, "Yellow's my favorite color." Conrad was a planned community. Jennie knew full well what she had in mind for the town. The town would compare to a company town that a mine or mill would operate. She named the streets after family and friends: Platt Park, Minerva Avenue, Minerva was her grandmother, Edward Street, George Conrad Avenue. Conrad Hotel offered a place where travelers could stay, where potential livestock buyers and agents could rest. This is the Conrad Hotel, and this is looking west toward the railway station. This is the Conrad Hotel today. This is the back of the hotel. You're looking at an area that goes into the cellar. And this is the full cement foundation of the hotel. There's also an informational sign there that the Nature Conservancy has constructed. Jennie was a shrewd businesswoman for a long time. She had a brickworks where off-size concrete bricks were built, and she used the name J.M. Conrad so that potential livestock buyers and livestock brokers wouldn't think they were dealing with a woman. And she didn't correct anybody who addressed their mail to her or addressed her as Mr. Conrad. This is a postcard from Bloomington, Indiana, addressed to Mr. Conrad. She used the name J.M. Conrad, and I think it had to rankle her when she got letters addressed to Mr. Conrad. I just can't see Jennie being too thrilled about that. She conducted a lot of business by postcard, and I think she did that because she couldn't type. Typing was far beneath her social level at the time. Now we think everybody needs to type. Typing was a trade in 1906. So postcards were cheap. She didn't have a secretary, so this was a good way for her to communicate. This is a note she received from someone who is interested in renting one of her farm properties. He wants to know the size, kind and size of improvements, the water supply, what stock do you allow renters to keep, school and church advantages, distance from the post office and market. Those all existed in Conrad. So she had enticement for tenant farmers to come and work for her. What kind of roads? What's the yield of crop? Is there any pasture or meadows? And I love his closing. I can give you good references. I think that helps a lot. She refused to use any services in Lake Village, though, and had refused to for a long time. Here's a postcard to her bank posted from Rose Lawn. She or someone else had to travel that distance to mail this in 1895. And as I've said so many times, she was shrewd. Here she corrected her bank in 1895. The card was returned to her with the correction. Your card with last account of deposit should read $26.42. According to my books, you have a credit of $25.24. Please correct. So, good for her. Jennie had a great reputation as a hog breeder and was nationally known among swine breeders. She wrote for a variety of journals and published materials on her own about Oak Dean and spotted Poland China hogs. She was quite flattered by an article from the Kankakee Daily Journal calling her the premier lady farmer in Indiana. She published several pamphlets, this one being a particular favorite of mine, as she discussed grazing hogs in oak woods so that they can fatten up on acorns. She also talked about the bluegrass in Lake Village. Is anybody here from Lake Village and has seen bluegrass? There isn't any bluegrass in Lake Village, but she wrote about that in her pamphlet. So when did Conrad fail or disappear? These are the front steps of the Conrad School. They face the west, so they're facing the railway. The rest of the building is gone, totally gone. Conrad lost its post office in 1915, and things started to fall apart from there. Gradually, the town slowed down to a halt by the early 1930s, and paired with the Great Depression, I'm sure Jennie found it difficult to maintain the town and the farms. There are many stories of Jennie's cantankerous nature. She had her way, and then there was no way. She fought with tenant farmers, hired men, household staff, attorneys, banks. She whipped children she caught picking wild blackberries on her properties. Her land, her blackberries was her philosophy. This newspaper clipping, many of the items that I'm showing you tonight came from a family collection that Rodney Smart, if you know Rodney, fantastic guy from Lake Village originally, arranged for us from one of Jennie's son's great nephews, Doug Wolf. And Doug is with us tonight. This article was in that that collection of materials, and I think this is hilarious. This is a paid ad that Jennie had put in the paper that says, having bought all the fruit and berries used by me on this place for the past years, I've decided to arrest all berry pickers and trespassers in order that I may have some of these things before I die. Also, Conrad Ranch is not a nudist colony, and the shameless natives of this district who lie around Saturday nights and Sundays in all shapes of nakedness must keep out henceforth. All these trespassers are well known and should be ashamed. J.M. Conrad. Now, this was 20 years before Lois Knapp came to Newton County and started a nudist camp. So this was happening here long before we had established groups. This is also one of the first times I've seen her change from Oakdean Farms to Conrad Ranch. Somewhere in there, it was never a legal change, but she started referring to it as Conrad Ranch. Again, this is one of my favorites. School census was always low. Children from farms around Conrad could attend school there as well, but the school had one teacher for 8 grades and extremely small classes. The Perry Bailey children attended Conrad schools for a period of time, and you may know some of them. Hetty Abbott, Stella Rainford, Pauline Garmong were all part of that family. Hetty Abbott told me of her memories of Jennie Conrad several years ago. Jennie would let Hetty sit on her lap and play with the gold bracelets she always wore. That lasted until the youngest of the Bailey children were born, twins Pauline and Paul. Then Jennie was always holding them. She didn't want anything to do with Hetty, and Hetty was forgotten. But in this photograph of Jennie, and this was taken probably late 1920s, early 30s, you can see those gold bracelets on her wrist. Oakdean Farm had a bunkhouse located on the curve of County Road 700 North. It's gone now, but the eastern half of the home shown here is part of the bunkhouse, and you can see a distinct division between one side and the other. So the side on your right-hand side was the original bunkhouse. This has now been taken down, but this board was found when the home was taken down. Isaac Smart owned a coal yard and lumber yard in Kentland and was a predecessor to Rodney Smart and to Dave Smart, who's with us tonight. Rodney was the last resident of this home, and Jennie must have ordered wood for the construction of the bunkhouse from Isaac. So it's proof that Jennie did business in Kentland and Morocco, or in Kentland as well as Morocco and Roselawn. She wasn't going to Lake Village. Wasn't having any of it. I have 2 COD notices here from the station master, Rufus Robinson, father of Ed Robinson, our local attorney. Jennie began receiving more and more COD, cash-on-delivery orders shipped by rail. The practice was for her station master to pay the bill and she would reimburse. Since one is a second notice, I wonder if she weren't experiencing financial issues then, because one is marked as a second notice. Jennie and Robinson had a difficult relationship as he followed New York Central policy and Jennie had her own policy. Robinson quit his position, walked off after Jennie buggy-whipped little Edwin for picking her wild berries. Ed was also a key player in the selling off of this land and the holdings after Jennie's death. Jennie's personality did not make her a stellar boss, and tenant farmers didn't stay. I've always thought she struggled with depression and always felt persecuted. I've often said that Jennie was mentally ill and deteriorated throughout her life. When she advertised for new employees, she would ask for white, non-smoking, non-drinking Christian men to operate the daily farming operations. Her pay wasn't the best, so in many ways she drove herself out of business with her demands. To me, Jennie's ads, like this one for a son with a shotgun, is indicative of her deteriorating mental state. She was feeling persecuted by others and needed protection that I'm certain Platt was unwilling to offer. Platt, her son, was living in the city of Chicago and working as an investment banker. Ads like this also made Jennie an easy target for other people. Seeks son with shotgun to rout farm trespassers. Mrs. Jennie Conrad, wealthy owner of a 5,000-acre farm at Conrad, Indiana, lonesome for the protection and interest that would be shown by a son, advertised yesterday in the Tribune for someone to take the place of a son, learn the farming business, and incidentally keep the trespassers away from the farm. The son-to-be must have the nerve to shoot if necessary in defending this farm from trespassers. The advertisement, which was signed Conrad Ranch, of which Mrs. Conrad is the owner, follows. Man, athletic, well-bred college man, American with nerves and shotgun to prevent trespassers on cattle ranch near Chicago. Board and good home for such service. Ample time for study, hunting, fishing. Man using tobacco not wanted. Prefer one with agricultural knowledge, wishing to learn the business, taking a son's place. Jennie and Platt fussed with each other most of Platt's adult life, the rest of Jennie's life. And I think this article was also, or this ad was also meant as an insult to her own son. References and particulars required. Conrad Ranch. Mrs. Conrad is a widow with one son. The latter has not lived at the home place for several years. I think now we know why. She was pretty difficult. Why did Conrad fail? The costs were high to operate an estate, as she called it, a town, a home, tenant farms, thriving swine operation. During her heyday, she shipped 1,000 hogs all over the world every year, as evidenced by this inquiry from Spain in 1928. Jennie enjoyed a wealthy lifestyle, and having never had to live within a budget, let alone work for her own income, she struggled. In this photograph, she's dressed grandly with jewelry, but she looks suntanned and tired. She looks weary. Dressing well took money, as did photography at the time, and she had a lot of photographs taken of both Platt and herself. While I haven't spoken much about Platt, it isn't an omission of choice. I don't know much about him until he was older. He was educated in boarding schools and at the University of Chicago. He did visit Conrad, but his relationship with Jennie was strained and became distant after George's death. Platt isn't my subject tonight either. He is here in this photograph with a friend from the U of C hunting ducks here in Newton County. And you can tell which one is Platt. He's on your left. I can pick Platt out of pictures in a heartbeat simply because I've seen so many. But keep in mind that tuition and college expenses were part of Jennie's costs to maintain their lifestyles as well. I believe the financial troubles always existed for Jennie. A telegram from 1928 reads, "Dear Platt, please come here either Saturday night or Sunday morning without fail. I've come to the end of my rope and must mortgage the place again to get money. I've sold all the hogs, and they will not sell as well as I..." And then there are words I can't pick up. "I thought we'd better. I have no help but Willie. I do P.O. work and board, for more is only a bother. Love, Mother." Now this photo of Jennie shows, I think I skipped a slide. No, I didn't. This is Jennie, again, in the same period, about mid-1930s. She passed away in Rensselaer Home Hospital on September 9th. At the time of her death, she owned about half of the 4,400 acres her father had deeded to her. The remaining acreage, which she called Conrad Farms, was left to her only son, Platt. And what makes Conrad special from other towns is it was a planned community. It was platted, planned, and built where no other structures existed. She had the town laid out by that map that you saw earlier. It disappeared quickly when it failed. While other structures and businesses were operated on the Conrad footprint, those structures are gone, and those businesses are gone, and that's because they were company businesses. Much of Conrad was disassembled to build other structures. As people often ask me, where's the Conrad School? And I'm like, well, the Conrad School was disbanded in 1926. The school superintendent, or the township trustee who was in charge of schools, took that disbanded Conrad School, took that charter away from them, and the brick from that structure was taken to build additions to the original Lake Village Elementary School. So the town was plundered, and maybe that isn't a bad thing because it was really good quality brick. The brick that you see sitting on this signpost is Tiffany brick. It's a porcelain enamel finished brick from Momence, Illinois, I believe. Yes. Again, my co-conspirator, Richard Katz, found this first sample. Fiddlesticks. There we go. So what's at Conrad now? Not much. We have lovely trails, all times of the year. This is the entrance to the Western Trailhead. The land was owned by others, and it was sold off piece by Jennie, and some by Platt after Jennie's death in '39, but most of the town remained intact. Much of the income from the land sales was used to pay off Jennie's debt, as Jennie had the same financial issues she accused her father of having. Many of us remember Conrad as being a dumping grounds. As a young girl, I can remember people taking appliances out there just to dump them. It was a good place to put them away where nobody could see them. Or as a place to gather to drink beer in our misspent youths. And I must say, I drank a few beers in Conrad. Personally, I'm thankful both Conrad and I have outgrown that status. My next effort will be to trace the ownership of the land forward from Jennie, but here's what I do know. In 1996 and 1998, the Indiana chapter of the Nature Conservancy purchased 300 acres of what we now know as Conrad Station Savannah. The black oak savanna here is home to many animals and insects, including red-headed woodpeckers, glass lizards, brown snakes, swallowtails, and promethea moths. The Nature Conservancy has established a packed dirt trail with informational boards for people to enjoy Conrad's history and natural settings. I try to lead hikes in Conrad every season so people can see how this land changes. It has been repopulated with some native wildflowers. It has been burned as part of controlled burns to control the undergrowth in black oak savanna. And I always find remarkable things when I hike at Conrad. Thank you. Do you have any questions or comments or concerns? I have people I want to stand up. So Richard Katz has stood up. Richard, like I said, is my go-to person because he's as curious about Conrad and Jennie as I am. Doug, please stand up. This is Doug Wolf. And Doug traveled from Dallas, Texas to be with us tonight. That was no...
My one comment is, off the first talk, is I'm glad I am not a blood descendant.
I'm glad you're not too, because I wouldn't want you to sit here going, that's my great-grandmother you're dissing there. But I had a gentleman from Lake Village take me aside tonight, Tony Baroni, I won't say his name, and tell me, you know nobody in Lake Village liked her. Yeah, I'm pretty aware of that. They wouldn't work for her. She was demanding and hateful. I don't know if I can answer your questions. I've heard some good stories tonight, but what you offer tonight I can take and use to improve this presentation. So please do offer what you know about Conrad. And this is one of my favorite pictures, by the way. This is a picture looking through trees just as the
I
colors
have
were
one
changing last
comment
fall.
about Jennie Conrad. I've heard all throughout the years. I was raised in Lake Village, and I'm 77 years old. Well, one story always stood out to me was the story about Jennie. She had a fire down around her place at Conrad, and people from Lake Village went to would have been Henry Stoner's general store, and got shovels and rakes and ran down to Conrad and put the fire out from her. And Henry sent her a bill for the rakes and shovels and stuff to put out the fire. And she sent it back saying, I never ordered this rakes and stuff like that.
That would be Jennie. Just make George Washington cry when she squeezed that nickel. Phil Boldman, would you tell your story? Would you tell the story you told me earlier? Because I love this story.
The railroad went through Conrad, started getting built in about 1905. It was finished in 1906. And naturally it needed to go 4 miles through Conrad. And Conrad's told the railroad, yeah, you can build your railroad, but anybody that wants to ride a train from Conrad, either way, freight or passenger, could ride the train. So they had to keep an open station there from 1905 until the last person on the family tree had passed away. Even though nobody lived close, nobody would run it, she held them to the contract. So that kept 5 people in a job, 5 railroaders in a job until the last person on the family tree had passed away.
Now that's my kind of finagling.
Yeah.
So that would have been 1971, I believe, when Lena passed away. Is that correct, Doug? Platt married Doug's great aunt, Lena Pohl.
Lena Pohl. She passed away in 71.
Okay, so the train had to keep space for a Conrad heir to ride that train. And there had to be at least some kind of shack there in Conrad for a for a train attendant to get that person off and on the train.
It actually did not last till 71, but it stayed there till the mid-60s anyway.
That doesn't surprise me. Doesn't that sound like something Jennie'd come up with? What a finagler. I got to give her a lot of credit. I mean, it was a tough time to be a woman, frankly. You couldn't work to support yourself. You couldn't go out and get a job, but she managed. She stood up with them.
What did she have against Lake Village people?
I know she didn't like the ethnicity of the ladies in Lake Village, the Eastern European. She didn't like the Polish ladies. She didn't like the Serbian ladies, and I don't get it because the Czechoslovakian ladies, their food's fantastic and they're wonderful people. So I don't get what her problem was, because I like Lake Village. You ought to like Lake Village. You've lived there forever. Next question, Beth. Move away from him, please. He's just going to make trouble. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add about Conrad? Like I said, this is a work in progress. Ronnie Madison. Where's Ronnie? There he is. Ronnie had a grandmother that cooked for Jennie. Did you not? Yes. How long did she cook for her?
Not very long.
Imagine that.
She was a real crab. I can remember my grandma telling me, says that woman is unbelievable.
I think that's the nicest way I've heard it put.
She did not like other people's cooking.
But she wouldn't cook for herself.
No, she wouldn't cook for herself, but grandma would cook good. Everybody loved it. She didn't.
But
So
if
that's
you knew
that
Ethel
story.
Studer from Lake Village, Ethel was Jennie's companion and traveled with her for years, back and forth to Chicago. Go figure. Yes, Mr. Smart.
I remember Rufus Robinson. That
Yep.
was the station master at Conrad. Mm-hmm. He was a good friend of my father, and when I was, 4 years old, we used to go down to the Conrad. At that time, he was running the depot in Lake Village, and I had a pot-bellied stove there, and I'd sit on their lap and everything. And I knew Rufus lived about a mile west of Conrad, mm-hmm. and his wife Ina lived with him. He was a huge man, and Ina was just a little bitty thing.
Okay, well, she was a teacher
Yeah, but
originally.
they were great people. I'm telling you, they
she
were
was
great
the
people.
original teacher at Conrad, or
Yeah.
one of Jennie's many teachers. Although they had a church at Conrad, they never employed a minister. If 30 people gathered on Sunday, they took a poll to see who was of what denomination. And if the Baptists won, they had a Baptist service, and if the Episcopalians won, they had an Episcopal service, and if the Catholics won, they had Mass. So that's how church services were determined at Conrad every Sunday, that's what it was called, the Conrad Mission Church, because there wasn't, but it was just the easiest way to run the church. I guess it is a democratic way to handle it.
So was there ever a census taken of the residents at Conrad at any time? Is there any documentation as to
I have not
who was
looked through
there?
the 1910 census yet to see what is there. But Jennie listed her address, of course, as Conrad as soon as she could, because then she did have a business card that was addressed to Morocco, Indiana. She used the Morocco post office, or she'd use the Roselawn post office. She would not use the Lake Village post office. She wasn't having anything to do with those people. Which, we have questions on the other side of the room. Yes, ma'am.
No, it is for the recording.
Oh, for the do you have any idea how many houses she actually filled with families and about what the population of Conrad was?
I think the maximum population of Conrad was about 40 people at its peak. There weren't many. There were maybe 12 homes. She'd planned a lot more real estate than that. But, and if I go back through my slides, I can show you on the map. She had plans, but those plans never developed. The only street that's recognized now on this map is Edward Street, which is the street on the top edge of Platt Park. And that one is acknowledged in county records to this day. But Hughes Street, Broadway, Brevoort, those streets aren't acknowledged. So I don't think it was developed much more than just that concentration around the rail depot. The stockyards were north of town. She did have the stockyards quite a ways away from what she originally planned. And again, Mr. Katz and I have tinkered with it, and I'll fight you on it, where those stockyards are. I think we know that.
If you take the map, one that you showed, you can purchase these maps through the Indiana State Archives. In 1939, Indiana commissioned a complete aerial survey of the entire state. And you can really zoom in on Conrad, and you can make out, actually you can, sorry, you can, I think you're absolutely right, I think that you can make out this area right here where there's stockyards.
I'll take it from this side.
Okay.
We got the town of Conrad here, the Union Jack. Stockyards are up here.
And there's a clearing here,
Yes.
and there's a clearing here, and actually, I even zoomed in more, and I think there was the first school. Wasn't the first school just to the east?
Yes.
I think you can still see the remnants of the first school in 1939. And then, so when you really zoom in on this, in answer, you were asking about the structures. By 1939, of course, like you said, the town was about gone. You could still see a couple of the buildings, but you could kind of make out where there might have been some homes, or not even foundations, but
Clearings.
one thing that was brought out that I thought was interesting the other night on the walk was that one of the ways to tell where maybe some of the cottages or homes were is where you find some non-native plants, where
Yes.
maybe they had planted some plants around their structures.
You hike in the springtime. in
Irises
woods
and
looks
things
a
like
thicket,
that.
and you see one daffodil.
Yeah.
And you know
Yeah.
somebody brought you that one daffodil. It's much more common at the Indiana Dunes, but you will see flowers that are non-native flowers in the Conrad area. An occasional lily of the valley, an occasional daffodil. So here's the town, here's where Jennie lived, and then here is Oak Dean Farm.
And you can see that one building that you showed that's
Absolutely.
down there. Yeah. Actually, it's right here.
Yep. And that building, that structure's still there. If anyone has photographs of Conrad, or photographs of this area, the Oakdean Farm area, I'd love to see them, make copies. We're always looking for new, photographs to enhance our knowledge of this area, because other than what Jennie's written, other than the letters and the newspaper clippings I've read to you tonight, there's no authoritative documentation of this community. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kay. It was a wonderful presentation, and I think we all learned something tonight that we didn't know before. So that's good. That's great. Yes, I don't believe that for a minute. So, several years ago, in fact, it was in 2013, Gerald Bourne, along with the Friends of the Kankakee Sands, put together a book called The Saga of Jennie Conrad, and many of you may have this. We've had a lot of requests for this book. Unfortunately, they're out of print. So I think Janet and I and the rest of the Family History Division have decided we may reprint this. So I have a sign-up sheet here if you are interested in purchasing one. We don't know what the price will be because it'll depend on how many copies we have printed and that sort of thing, but it will not be an amazing amount. It'll be whatever it was before, probably pretty close, which I think was, what, $15 or something like that. So this is a really good book. If you haven't seen it, I've got a photocopy of it here. You can go through it. So we have other publications about Beaver Lake here for sale too tonight, and I really would like to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy schedules to come and listen to our program tonight. And we have membership forms here if you'd like to join us on a monetary basis. That is the backbone of our organization. So thank you again, and everybody have safe travels home. Oh, we do have some light refreshments. Please take part. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.